Come on, car, restart it!
The rain hammered my windshield like bullets as I crouched under the hood of my battered Ford pickup, trying to coax life back into the engine that had died for the third time this week. Water dripped down my neck, mixing with the grease already staining my work shirt. That's when I heard Sarah's voice cutting through the storm, sharp and venomous, coming from our kitchen window. "It's easier to steal from him than ask nicely, Jake. He'd never see it coming." I froze, wrench in hand. My wife of 15 years was talking to someone on speakerphone, and from the intimate tone in her voice, it wasn't her sister. "You sure he won't catch on?" The male voice was smooth, confident. "Tommy seems smarter than you give him credit for." Sarah laughed, a sound that used to make my heart skip. Now it felt like ice water in my veins. "Trust me, my husband is too busy playing the loyal fool to notice anything. Besides, Judge Harrow has everything lined up. Tommy will be out of the picture soon enough." Judge Harrow? My blood turned cold. That was the same judge who'd been handling several cases involving my construction business lately. The same judge who'd been asking pointed questions about my bookkeeping. "And after," Jake's voice again, "after, we'll have everything. The business, the house, his savings. He built it all for us without even knowing it." I stood there in the rain, invisible in the darkness, listening to my wife plan my destruction with surgical precision. The wrench slipped from my numb fingers, clattering against the concrete driveway. But the sound was swallowed by thunder, and Sarah kept talking. "The beautiful part is he'll blame himself. Tommy always does. He'll think he wasn't good enough, wasn't smart enough. He'll never suspect that his loving wife and his trusted friends set him up." Friends. Plural. My stomach lurched as I realized this conspiracy went deeper than just Sarah and her mystery lover. I closed the hood quietly and walked to the garage, my mind reeling. 15 years of marriage, 15 years of working 60-hour weeks to build something for us, 15 years of coming home exhausted but happy because I thought I was building a life with someone who loved me. Plot twist, Tommy. She never did. I sat on my workbench, staring at the wall covered with photos of Sarah and me. Our wedding day, vacations we'd taken, Christmas mornings, all of it a lie, apparently. Or maybe it had been real once before I became inconvenient. The kitchen light went out. Sarah was heading to bed, probably texting Jake about their conversation. I wondered how long this had been going on. Months? Years? How many times had I kissed her goodnight while she planned my downfall? My phone buzzed. A text from my business partner, Mike Chen. "Tommy, we need to talk tomorrow. There's been some irregularities in the accounts. Nothing major, but we should discuss it." Mike had been my friend since high school. We'd started our construction company together 8 years ago, built it from nothing into something respectable. If he was seeing irregularities, it meant Sarah's plan was already in motion. I walked into the house, dripping wet, and found Sarah in the bathroom brushing her teeth. She looked at me in the mirror, and for a split second, I thought I saw something calculating in her eyes. Then she smiled, the same warm smile that had convinced me to propose all those years ago. "You look like a drowned rat," she said, laughing. "Truck giving you trouble again?" "Yeah," I said, studying her face. "But I think I'm starting to figure out what's wrong with it." She rinsed her mouth and turned to face me. "Maybe it's time for a new one. You've been nursing that old thing along for too long." The double meaning wasn't lost on me. I was the old thing she was ready to replace. "Maybe you're right," I said. "Maybe it's time for some changes around here." That night, I lay awake listening to Sarah breathe beside me, wondering if she was really asleep or just pretending. Every soft sound she made felt like a lie. Every movement felt like betrayal. At 3 a.m, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She reached for it immediately, too quickly for someone who'd been asleep. The screen lit up her face as she read the message, and I saw her smile in the darkness. She typed back quickly, then set the phone down and settled back into bed. Within minutes, she was breathing deeply again, but I knew she wasn't asleep. She was savoring whatever sweet nothing Jake had sent her. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, planning. If Sarah wanted to play games, I'd play along. But she was about to learn that 15 years of marriage had taught me a few things about her too. And unlike her, I'd been paying attention. The next morning, I was up before Sarah, making coffee and eggs like nothing had changed. She came down in her robe, hair perfect despite supposedly just waking up. "You're up early," she said, pouring herself coffee. "Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about what Mike said about the accounts. Her hand paused for just a fraction of a second before continuing to add cream to her coffee. What about them? Probably nothing. You know how paranoid he gets about the books? I watched her face carefully. He thinks someone's been skimming money, but I told him that's impossible. The only people with access are him, me, and the bookkeeper. Well, I'm sure you'll figure it out, she said, but her voice was tight. I kissed her forehead before leaving for work, the same gesture I'd made thousands of times before. But this time it felt like a declaration of war. At the office, Mike was waiting for me with a stack of printouts and a grim expression. My business partner was a good man, honest to a fault, which made what I was about to discover even more painful. Tommy, sit down, he said. We've got a problem. He spread the papers across my desk, bank statements, invoices, receipts. The numbers told a story I didn't want to believe. Someone's been writing checks against the business account, Mike said. Small amounts at first, but it's been escalating. Look at this. He pointed to a series of withdrawals over the past 6 months. They started at a few $100s and worked up to several thousand. All of them had my signature. Mike, I didn't write these checks. I know you didn't, but that's your signature, and they were all cashed at the First National branch where Sarah works. Sarah, of course. She'd had access to my signature for years, had signed my name to birthday cards and tax returns countless times, and working at the bank gave her the perfect opportunity to cash forged checks without raising suspicion. There's more, Mike said quietly. I got a call this morning from Judge Harrow's office. Apparently, someone filed a complaint alleging financial impropriety in our business dealings. They want to see all our records. Judge Harrow. The same Judge Sarah had mentioned on the phone last night. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Who filed the complaint? Mike looked uncomfortable. It was anonymous, but it came with copies of these forged checks and some other documents I've never seen before. Invoices for work we supposedly did but didn't, payments to contractors who don't exist. Someone's been building a case against you for months. I stared at the papers, seeing my life's work being systematically destroyed. But instead of despair, I felt something else rising in my chest. Anger. Cold, calculating anger. What do you want to do? Mike asked. I want to find out exactly how deep this goes, I said. And then I want to make sure everyone involved pays for it. Mike nodded grimly. I'm with you, Tommy, whatever it takes. But as I looked at my oldest friend, I couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah had mentioned friends, plural. How many people in my life were part of this conspiracy? How many people I trusted were working to destroy me? That afternoon, I drove to the gym where I used to box in my 20s. Hank Morrison still ran the place, and he'd always been straight with me. If anyone would help me figure out who I could trust, it was Hank. I found him in his office, a cramped room above the main gym floor. He looked up from his paperwork and grinned when he saw me. Tommy Brennan, haven't seen you in months. You look like hell. Feel worse than I look, Hank. I closed the door behind me. I need your help with something, and it's not pretty. Hank leaned back in his chair, studying me with the same intensity he used to watch for tells in the ring. Lay it on me. I told him everything. The phone conversation, the forged checks, the judge, Sarah's betrayal. Hank listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each revelation. Jesus, Tommy. How long you think this has been going on? Months, maybe longer. But here's what really scares me. She mentioned friends helping her. People I trust are working against me, and I don't know who. Hank was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a bottle of whiskey. He poured 2 shots and slid one across to me. You remember what I used to tell you about fighting dirty opponents? Yeah, don't fight their fight. Make them fight yours. Exactly. Your wife thinks she's got you figured out. She thinks you're the same trusting fool you've always been. But she's about to learn that you've been holding back. I downed the whiskey, feeling it burn away the last of my naive faith in the people I'd loved. So, what do we do? Hank smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. We give them exactly what they want. We let them think their plan is working perfectly. And while they're celebrating, we figure out who all the players are and what they really want. And then we destroy them all. The knock on my door came at dawn, just like Sarah said it would. I'd been awake for hours, watching through the bedroom window as unmarked cars positioned themselves around our house. Sarah lay beside me, breathing steadily, but I knew she was awake. She'd been tense all night, waiting for this moment. Police, open up. I got out of bed slowly, pulling on jeans and a t-shirt. Sarah stirred, putting on a perfect performance of confused awakening. Tommy, what's happening? I don't know, I lied. Stay here. I walked downstairs and opened the front door to find Detective Ray Morrison, Hank's nephew. I realized, with a sinking heart, standing on my porch with a warrant and 6 uniformed officers. Thomas Brennan, you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and theft. You have the right to remain silent. The words washed over me as they cuffed my hands behind my back. I looked back to see Sarah at the top of the stairs, wearing a nightgown and an expression of perfect shock. If I hadn't known better, I would have believed she was devastated. There must be some mistake, she called down to Detective Morrison. My husband would never... Ma'am, we have substantial evidence of financial crimes involving Mr. Brennan's business. We'll need to search the premises. As they led me toward the police car, I saw our neighbors gathering on their porches and peering through windows. Mrs. Patterson from next door was already on her phone, no doubt spreading the news through the neighborhood gossip network. By noon, everyone in town would know that Tommy Brennan had been arrested for stealing from his own company. The ride to the station gave me time to think. Detective Morrison was Hank's nephew, which meant either Hank was part of the conspiracy or Ray was acting without his uncle's knowledge. Given what Hank had told me yesterday about fighting dirty, I suspected the latter. Ray had probably been fed information by someone he trusted, not knowing he was being used. At the station, they processed me with efficient brutality. Fingerprints, photos, strip search, orange jumpsuit. Each step was designed to strip away dignity and identity, to transform Tommy Brennan, the businessman, into prisoner 47291. My lawyer arrived 3 hours later. David Walsh had handled my business contracts for years, and I'd always trusted him. But as he sat across from me in the interrogation room, I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach drop. Tommy, I have to be honest with you. The evidence against you is substantial. He opened his briefcase and pulled out copies of the same documents Mike had shown me, plus others I'd never seen. Bank records, forged contracts, fake invoices. Someone had been very thorough. The prosecution is willing to offer a plea deal. If you cooperate and make full restitution, they'll recommend a reduced sentence, maybe 5 to 7 years instead of 15 to 20. David, I didn't do any of this. Those aren't my signatures. Those contracts are fake, and I've never seen half these invoices before. He looked uncomfortable. Tommy, I've been your lawyer for 8 years. I have to advise you that fighting this could result in a much harsher sentence. The evidence is overwhelming. Whose side are you on? The question hung in the air between us. David's discomfort told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't just my lawyer anymore. He was part of Sarah's plan, whether he knew it or not. I'm on your side, Tommy. That's why I'm recommending you take the deal. I leaned back in my chair, studying the man I'd trusted with my legal affairs for nearly a decade. How long have you been sleeping with my wife, David? His face went white. What are you talking about? Come on. You think I'm stupid? The way you're pushing this plea deal, the way you won't even pretend to investigate the evidence. How long? David closed his briefcase with shaking hands. I think you're under a lot of stress, Tommy. Maybe you should consider psychological evaluation as part of your defense strategy. He left without another word, and I knew I was truly alone. My wife, my business partner, my lawyer, a judge, and God knew who else were all working together to destroy me. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking in its thoroughness. That night in my cell, I lay on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling. My cellmate was a career criminal named Eddie Torino, a compulsive gambler who'd been arrested for running numbers. He was also, it turned out, a fountain of information about the local criminal underworld. You're the contractor, right? He said around 9 o'clock. The one who got busted for stealing from his own company? That's me. Tough break, but I gotta ask, you know a guy named Jake Morrison? I sat up. Morrison. Like Detective Ray Morrison. Should I? Runs the night shift at the Riverside Casino. Real smooth operator, but he's got a serious gambling problem. Owes money to some very unpleasant people. How much money? Eddie whistled low. Word is, he's into the Torelli family for about 200 grand. That's the kind of debt that gets you fitted for concrete shoes if you don't pay up fast. Jake Morrison. Jake who'd been on the phone with Sarah. Jake who was Detective Ray Morrison's brother, which explained how they'd gotten inside information about my business and personal life. This Jake, he been flashing cash lately? Funny you should ask. Last week he paid down 50 grand of his debt. Said he had a big score coming, something that would clear him completely. I lay back down, pieces clicking into place. Jake needed money to pay off the mob. Sarah needed me out of the way to get her hands on our assets. Judge Harrow and David Walsh were probably being blackmailed or bribed. Detective Ray Morrison was being fed information by his brother, not knowing he was part of a criminal conspiracy. But there was still something missing. Sarah was smart, but she wasn't smart enough to orchestrate something this complex on her own. Someone else was pulling the strings, someone with access to information about my business and personal life. The next morning, I had a visitor. Trina Walsh, David's wife and Sarah's best friend since college. She sat across from me in the visiting room, perfectly dressed and made up, with tears in her eyes that didn't quite reach her smile. "Oh, Tommy, I'm so sorry about all this. Sarah is just devastated." "I'm sure she is. She asked me to bring you this." Trina slid an envelope across the table. "She wanted you to know she's fighting for you, trying to save the house and the business." I opened the envelope and found divorce papers. The petition cited irreconcilable differences and requested full custody of our assets due to my criminal behavior and financial irresponsibility. She's filing for divorce? She has to protect herself, Tommy. You understand that, right? If she doesn't distance herself from you legally, she could lose everything too. The concern in Trina's voice was perfectly performed, but I caught something else underneath it. Satisfaction. She was enjoying this. "Trina, how long have you known?" "Known what?" "About Sarah and Jake. About the money. About all of it." Her mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw the real Trina Walsh underneath. Cold, calculating, and completely without remorse. "I don't know what you mean." "Sure you do. You're the mastermind, aren't you? Sarah's not smart enough to plan something this elaborate, but you are. You've been planning this for months, maybe years." Trina stood up, her fake tears gone. "You're delusional, Tommy. The stress of your situation is making you paranoid." "What did I ever do to you, Trina? Why do you hate me so much?" She paused at the door, looking back at me with undisguised contempt. "You want to know why? Because you fired me 5 years ago, because you humiliated me in front of your entire crew when you caught me skimming money from petty cash, because you cost me my reputation and my career." The memory came flooding back. Trina had worked as my office manager for 6 months before I discovered she'd been stealing small amounts of cash and supplies. I'd fired her quietly, without pressing charges, thinking I was being merciful. $200, Trina. You're destroying my life over $200? It was never about the money, Tommy. It was about respect. You treated me like I was nothing, like I was disposable. Now you know how it feels. She left me sitting there, finally understanding the scope of what I was facing. Trina had spent 5 years planning her revenge, carefully positioning herself to destroy everything I'd built. She'd seduced my wife into an affair, connected her with Jake Morrison, and orchestrated a conspiracy that would leave me penniless and imprisoned while she walked away clean. But Trina had made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed I was the same naive fool who'd shown her mercy 5 years ago. She was about to learn that prison had a way of changing a man's perspective on justice and revenge. That afternoon, I got another visitor. Hank Morrison walked into the visiting room looking grim and determined. "Tommy, we need to talk fast. I've got some information that's going to blow this whole thing wide open." "Your nephew Ray is part of this, isn't he?" Hank's face darkened. "Ray's being used, just like you were. His brother Jake has been feeding him false information, making him think he was investigating legitimate crimes. Ray had no idea he was being manipulated." "What about you? Are you really here to help me? Or is this part of Trina's plan too?" Hank leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "Tommy, I've known you for 20 years. I watched you grow from a scared kid into a man who built something with his bare hands. You think I'd be part of something like this?" I studied his face, looking for tells the way he taught me in the boxing ring. All I saw was genuine anger and determination. "What do you need me to do? I need you to trust me for about 72 hours. Can you do that?" "Do I have a choice?" "There's always a choice, Tommy. But if you want to come out of this with your life and your dignity intact, you need to let me work." That night, Eddie Torino shared more information about Jake Morrison's gambling debts and connections to organized crime. By the time Lights Out came, I had a clearer picture of the conspiracy against me and the weaknesses I could exploit. Prison food is bland, but so is betrayal. At least in here, the knives are out in the open. As I lay in my narrow bunk, I thought about Sarah lying in our bed, probably texting Jake about their victory. I thought about Trina Walsh, savoring her revenge after 5 years of careful planning. I thought about David Walsh and Judge Harrow, corrupted by money or blackmail or simple greed. They all thought they'd won. They thought Tommy Brennan was finished, broken, ready to accept whatever scraps they were willing to throw him. They were about to discover how wrong they were. The package arrived on my third day in county lockup, delivered by a grinning courier who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The guard handed it to me during rec time, and I could see Eddie Torino watching with interest as I opened it. Inside was a DVD labeled, "How Was the Taste of Judges Johnson?" in Trina's handwriting, along with a note. "Thought you might enjoy watching your wife's performance review." I stared at the disc, feeling something cold and hard crystallize in my chest. They weren't content with destroying me financially and legally. They wanted to humiliate me, to break me psychologically. "What you got there?" Eddie asked, moving closer. Before I could answer, 5 men in street clothes burst into the rec room. They moved fast and efficient, overwhelming the 2 guards on duty with practiced ease. These weren't random criminals. They were professionals. The leader, a compact man with dead eyes, walked directly to me while his associates kept the guards and other inmates back. "You, Tommy Brennan?" "Yeah. Got a message for you. When you get out, ask for Hank. And don't trust your lawyer." He dropped a small piece of paper in my hand, then signaled his team. They were gone as quickly as they'd appeared, leaving the guards confused and the inmates buzzing with excitement. I unfolded the paper. It contained a single line. "Jake owes the Torelli family $200K payment due in 72 hours. Eddie whistled low when I showed him the note. "Jesus, Tommy, you know some serious people." "Apparently so do the people who set me up." That night, I lay in my bunk thinking about the implications. The Torelli family was old-school organized crime, the kind of people who collected debts with interest and compound fractures. If Jake Morrison owed them $200,000 and couldn't pay, he was going to disappear, permanently. But if Jake disappeared, Sarah would lose her meal ticket and her protection. Trina's carefully orchestrated plan would start to unravel. The question was whether I could use that chaos to my advantage. The next morning brought another visitor, Mike Chen, my business partner, looking haggard and worried. "Tommy, I've been going through everything with a fine-tooth comb. The more I dig, the more convinced I am that you're being framed." "What did you find?" Mike pulled out a folder of documents. "These forged checks, they're good, but they're not perfect. The paper stock is wrong, and the bank stamps don't match the dates. Someone was in a hurry." "Can you prove it?" "Maybe, but here's the interesting part. I tracked down some of the fake contractors listed on these invoices. They're real people, Tommy, but they've never worked for us. Someone used their names and social security numbers to create false employment records. Identity theft." "Exactly. And that's a federal crime, which means the FBI could get involved if we can prove it." I felt a spark of hope for the first time in days. "What do you need from me?" "Names. Anyone who had access to employee records, tax documents, social security numbers, anyone who could have gathered that information without raising suspicion." I thought about it carefully. Trina Walsh had access to everything when she worked for us. She handled payroll, benefits, tax filings. She would have had all the information needed to create fake identities. Mike nodded grimly. "I was afraid you'd say that. Trina's been very helpful since your arrest, offering to assist with the business records and documentation. She's covering her tracks, or planting more evidence. Tommy, I think she's been planning this for years." After Mike left, I requested a meeting with the prison chaplain. Father Rodriguez was a small, quiet man who'd been ministering to inmates for over 20 years. More importantly, he was one of the few people in the system who couldn't be bought or intimidated. "Father, I need to make a confession, but not the kind you're used to hearing." He listened without judgment as I told him the whole story. The conspiracy, the frame-up, the evidence of federal crimes. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "What do you want from me, son?" "I want you to make some phone calls. People trust you, and you have connections outside these walls. I need someone to contact the FBI about the identity theft, and I need someone to verify Jake Morrison's gambling debts." Father Rodriguez studied me carefully. "You're asking me to help you fight back against the people who did this to you. I'm asking you to help me expose the truth. And what happens when the truth comes out? Will you be satisfied with justice, or will you want revenge?" I met his gaze steadily. "Right now, Father, I'm not sure there's a difference." He nodded slowly. "I'll make your calls. But Tommy, be careful that fighting monsters doesn't turn you into one." That afternoon, I orchestrated my first move against the conspiracy. During yard time, I started a fight with a lifer named Marcus Webb, a mountain of a man who was connected to every criminal network in the state. The fight was brutal, but brief. Marcus put me on the ground hard, but not before I'd whispered what I needed to say. Jake Morrison owes Torelli money. He's planning to run with a banker's wife. They've got federal heat coming. Marcus smiled as the guards pulled us apart. Information was currency in prison, and I'd just given him something valuable. By nightfall, word would reach the Torelli family that Jake Morrison was planning to skip town with his girlfriend and their money. The next morning brought news that made my blood run cold. Detective Ray Morrison visited me in the interview room, looking shaken and confused. "Mr. Brennan, I need to ask you some questions about your relationship with my brother Jake." "What kind of relationship?" "I don't know your brother." Ray pulled out a photograph of Jake and Sarah together at a restaurant. "This was taken 3 nights ago. That's your wife with my brother." I studied the photo, letting appropriate shock and hurt cross my face. "I don't understand. Sarah said she was visiting her sister in Cleveland." "Mr. Brennan, I think my brother might be involved in your case. I think he might have been feeding me false information to make me believe you were guilty." Ray Morrison was a good cop who'd been manipulated by people he trusted. The pain in his eyes was genuine as he realized his own brother had used him to frame an innocent man. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I'm going to find out the truth, all of it." After Ray left, I sat in my cell thinking about the dominoes starting to fall. The Torelli family now knew Jake was planning to run. Detective Morrison was investigating his own brother. The FBI would soon be looking into the identity theft. Trina's perfect plan was developing cracks. That night, Eddie Torino shared the latest gossip from the criminal underground. Word is, Jake Morrison tried to make a run for it yesterday. Got as far as the airport before Torelli's people caught up with him. What happened? Let's just say he's been convinced to stay in town and honor his obligations. But here's the interesting part. Apparently he was traveling with a woman, middle-aged, blonde, carrying a suitcase full of cash. Sarah. They'd tried to run together and been caught. Now they were both trapped, with the mob breathing down their necks and law enforcement closing in from the other direction. "There's more," Eddie continued. "My cousin works at the courthouse. Says Judge Harrow has been asking a lot of questions about your case. Wants to know who's been feeding information to the media." "What media?" Eddie grinned. "Seems like someone's been leaking details about your case to investigative reporters. Questions about forged evidence, corrupt officials, conspiracy to commit fraud. The kind of questions that make judges very nervous." Hank. He'd promised me 72 hours, and he was using every connection he'd built over 40 years in this town. Boxing trainers knew everyone. Cops, criminals, reporters, politicians. He was orchestrating a campaign to expose the conspiracy from the outside, while I worked to destroy it from within. The next morning brought my final visitor of the week, Sarah herself, looking haggard and desperate. Gone was the confident woman who'd planned my destruction. In her place sat someone who was beginning to understand that she'd been outplayed. "Tommy, we need to talk." "About what? Your affair? Your theft? Your conspiracy with Trina Walsh to frame me for crimes I didn't commit?" Her face went white. "How did you really think I was that stupid, Sarah? Did you think I'd just sit in here and accept what you'd done to me?" "Tommy, you don't understand. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Trina said what? That you could steal everything I'd worked for and I'd never fight back? That you could humiliate me and destroy my life without consequences?" Sarah started crying, but they were tears of fear, not remorse. "Jake's in trouble, Tommy. Bad people are after him, after us. We need help." "You need help? You destroy my life, steal my money, frame me for federal crimes, and now you want my help. Please, Tommy, I know I made mistakes, but..." "Mistakes?" I leaned forward, letting her see the cold fury in my eyes. "Sarah, you didn't make mistakes. You made choices. You chose to betray me. You chose to steal from me. You chose to conspire with criminals to send me to prison. Now you get to live with the consequences of those choices." She left in tears, and I felt nothing but satisfaction. The woman I'd loved for 15 years was gone, replaced by a stranger who'd sold her soul for money and excitement. Whatever happened to her now, she'd earned it. That night, as I lay in my narrow bunk, I thought about Father Rodriguez's warning about becoming a monster. Maybe he was right. Maybe fighting back was changing me into something harder and colder than I'd been before. But as I listened to the sounds of the prison around me, the distant sobbing, the whispered threats, the grinding of locks and keys, I realized I didn't care. The old Tommy Brennan had been trusting and merciful. He'd shown kindness to people who betrayed him and given second chances to people who used them as weapons. The old Tommy Brennan was dead. In his place was someone who understood that mercy was weakness and trust was suicide. Someone who knew that in a world full of hunters, you either learned to hunt or you became prey. They wanted me to be the villain in their story. Fine. I'd be the best villain they'd ever seen. The charges were dropped on a Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after my arrest. Detective Ray Morrison walked into my cell personally to deliver the news, his face a mixture of relief and shame. "And Mr. Brennan, you're free to go. The district attorney has determined that the evidence against you was fabricated." "What about the people who fabricated it?" Ray's jaw tightened. "That's an ongoing investigation, but I can tell you that several arrests are expected in the coming days." I gathered my few possessions and walked out of county lockup into the morning sunshine. Hank was waiting for me in the parking lot, leaning against his old Buick with a grim smile on his face. "How do you feel?" he asked, as we drove away from the jail. "Like I've been dead for a week and just came back to life." "Good, because now the real work begins." Hank had been busy during my incarceration. He'd contacted FBI agents about the identity theft, fed information to investigative reporters, and used his network of contacts to pressure Judge Harrow and other corrupt officials. But most importantly, he'd been gathering intelligence on my enemies. "Trina Walsh is in full panic mode," he told me as we drove through town. "The FBI raided her house yesterday, seized computers and financial records. Word is they found evidence linking her to the fake contractor scheme." "What about Sarah and Jake?" "That's where it gets interesting. Jake's been cooperating with the Torelli family, trying to work off his debt. But Sarah's been less cooperative. She's been staying at the Riverside Casino, under Jake's protection. But that protection is getting thinner by the day." We pulled into the parking lot of Hank's gym. The familiar smell of sweat and leather hit me as we walked inside, and for the first time in a week, I felt like I could breathe. "What's the plan?" I asked. Hank led me upstairs to his office and closed the door. "The plan is to give them exactly what they deserve. But we're going to do it smart, and we're going to do it legal. Mostly." He opened a file cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. "I've been working with some friends of mine, retired cops, private investigators, people who know how to gather information without breaking laws. We've got enough dirt on your enemies to bury them all." The folder contained photographs, financial records, phone transcripts, and witness statements. It was a comprehensive dossier on the conspiracy against me, with evidence of crimes ranging from fraud to extortion to conspiracy. "Judge Harrow has been taking bribes for years," Hank explained. "Not just from your case, but from dozens of others. The FBI is building a RICO case against him and several other corrupt officials. And David Walsh, your lawyer, was being blackmailed. Trina had evidence of his gambling debts and some questionable financial dealings. She forced him to sabotage your defense by threatening to destroy his career and his marriage." I felt a brief moment of sympathy for David, but it passed quickly. He'd still betrayed me, regardless of his reasons. "What about Trina herself?" Hank's smile was cold. "Trina Walsh is going to federal prison for a very long time. Identity theft, wire fraud, conspiracy, extortion. She's looking at 20 to 30 years. And Sarah? That's up to you, Tommy. She's not going to prison. She was manipulated by Trina and Jake, and a good lawyer could probably get her off with probation. But her life, as she knew it, is over. She's lost her job at the bank. Her reputation is destroyed, and Jake is about to disappear permanently." I thought about Sarah, alone and scared at the casino, waiting for a man who was marked for death by the mob. Part of me felt sorry for her, but a larger part felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "I want to see her," I said. "I want to look her in the eye and tell her exactly what she's lost." Hank nodded. "I figured you might, but first we need to deal with Jake Morrison." That afternoon, we drove to the Riverside Casino, a gaudy monument to desperation and bad decisions on the outskirts of town. The parking lot was half empty, and the building looked shabby in the harsh daylight. Inside, the casino was a maze of slot machines and gaming tables, filled with the kind of people who had nowhere else to go. We found Jake Morrison in the high roller section, dealing blackjack to a table of tourists and looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. He saw me coming, and his face went white. "Tommy, I can explain." "No need for explanations, Jake. I know exactly what you did and why you did it." The tourists at his table looked uncomfortable as the tension ratcheted up. Jake signaled for a replacement dealer and led us to a quiet corner of the casino floor. Look, Tommy, it wasn't personal. I was in a bad spot, and Trina offered me a way out. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did hurt me. You destroyed my business, my marriage, my reputation. You sent me to jail for crimes you committed. Jake glanced around nervously. I know, and I'm sorry, but I can make it right. I can testify against Trina, tell the truth about everything. It's too late for that, Jake. The truth is already coming out, and you're not going to be around to testify anyway. His face went even whiter. What do you mean? I leaned closer, letting him see the cold fury in my eyes. I mean, the Torelli family knows you were planning to skip town with their money. They know Sarah was going to help you. They know everything, Jake. Because I told them. You what? I made sure they knew you were planning to betray them. Just like you betrayed me. Jake's hands were shaking now. Tommy, you don't understand. If they think I was going to run, they don't think it, Jake. They know it. Because you were caught at the airport with Sarah and a suitcase full of cash, remember? The color drained from his face completely. How did you... I know everything, Jake. I know about your debts, your desperation, your willingness to destroy innocent people to save your own skin. And now everyone else knows too. I turned to walk away, then paused and looked back at him. Oh, and Jake? You might want to call in sick tomorrow, permanently. We left him standing there, a broken man who finally understood that actions have consequences. As we walked through the casino, I felt a savage satisfaction that surprised me with its intensity. Feel better? Hank asked as we got back in his car. Getting there. Our next stop was Sarah's hotel room on the 3rd floor of the casino. She answered the door looking like she'd aged 10 years in the past week. Her hair was unwashed, her eyes were red from crying, and she was wearing the same clothes she'd had on during her jailhouse visit. Tommy, what are you doing here? I came to see how the other half lives. How's the high roller lifestyle treating you, Sarah? She stepped back to let us in. The room was a mess. Empty bottles, takeout containers, clothes scattered everywhere. The smell of desperation hung in the air like cheap perfume. I suppose you're here to gloat, she said, sitting heavily on the unmade bed. Actually, I'm here to give you a chance to explain. Help me understand how 15 years of marriage meant so little to you that you were willing to destroy me for money. Sarah started crying again, but this time the tears seemed genuine. It wasn't about the money, Tommy. Not at first. What was it about? It was about feeling alive again. Do you know what it's like to be married to someone who's never home, who's always working, who treats you like another piece of furniture? So you decided to steal from me and frame me for federal crimes? No, that was Trina's idea. She said we could take just enough to start over somewhere else. She said you'd never even notice. But it escalated. Sarah nodded miserably. Trina said we needed to discredit you, make it look like you were the one stealing. She said it would be easy, that you trusted everyone too much to see it coming. She was right about that. Tommy, I never wanted you to go to jail. I never wanted any of this to happen. I looked at my wife, my soon-to-be ex-wife, and felt nothing but pity. She'd been manipulated by Trina, seduced by Jake, and caught up in something far beyond her understanding. But she'd still made choices, and those choices had consequences. What do you want from me, Sarah? I want you to forgive me. I want us to try to work this out. Work what out? Our marriage is over. Your boyfriend is about to be eliminated by the mob. Your best friend is going to federal prison. Your life as you knew it is finished. But we could start over. We could... No, Sarah, we can't. You chose Jake over me. You chose money over loyalty. You chose to betray everything we built together. Now, you get to live with those choices. I stood up to leave, then turned back one final time. By the way, you should know that Jake tried to throw you under the bus to save himself. He told the FBI that stealing the money was your idea, that you seduced him into helping you frame me. The look of betrayal and devastation on her face was almost worth everything she put me through. Almost. That's not true, she whispered. Maybe not, but it's what he told them. So much for true love, right? As we left the casino, I felt lighter than I had in months. The weight of betrayal and humiliation was lifting, replaced by something harder and cleaner. Justice wasn't revenge, but sometimes they looked remarkably similar. One more stop, Hank said as we drove through town. Where? Trina Walsh's house. I want you to see what federal agents do to people who commit crimes against their neighbors. The Walsh house was in chaos. FBI agents were loading boxes of evidence into trucks while neighbors gathered to watch the show. Trina herself was nowhere to be seen, but David Walsh stood in his driveway looking like a man whose world had collapsed. He saw me and walked over, his face a mixture of shame and relief. "Tommy, I'm sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry for what I did to you." "Save it, David. You made your choice." She was going to destroy me. My gambling debts, some mistakes I made with client funds. She had evidence of everything. "So you decided to destroy me instead?" David nodded miserably. "I thought if I helped her frame you, she'd leave my family alone. I thought I could make it right later, after the heat died down." "How's that working out for you?" He looked at the FBI agents carrying his wife's belongings out of his house. "I'm probably going to lose my law license. Maybe go to jail myself. My kids won't even look at me." "Good," I said simply. As we drove away, I thought about the wreckage left behind by Trina's conspiracy. Lives destroyed, families shattered, careers ended. All because I'd fired a dishonest employee 5 years ago, and she decided to make me pay for it. But the reckoning wasn't over yet. There was still one more score to settle, one more person who needed to understand that actions have consequences. Judge Harrow was about to learn that corruption always comes with a price. The news broke on a Friday morning. Judge Harrison Harrow had been arrested by federal agents on charges of bribery, corruption, and conspiracy. The story dominated local media for days, with reporters digging into years of questionable decisions and suspicious financial transactions. I watched the coverage from Hank's gym, where I'd been staying since my release from jail. My house was still technically marital property, tied up in divorce proceedings, and I had no desire to return to a place filled with memories of betrayal. "Look at that," Hank said, pointing at the television screen. 30 years on the bench, and he's going to spend the rest of his life in federal prison. Judge Harrow's perp walk was a thing of beauty. The man who'd orchestrated my arrest was now wearing handcuffs himself, his reputation destroyed, and his future measured in decades behind bars. "What about the others?" I asked. "Trina Walsh was arrested yesterday. The FBI hit her with a 20-count indictment: identity theft, wire fraud, conspiracy, extortion. Her lawyer is already talking about a plea deal, but she's looking at 25 to life. And Jake?" Hank's expression darkened. "Jake Morrison disappeared 3 days ago. His car was found in the river, but no body. The Torelli family doesn't leave loose ends." I felt a moment of satisfaction, followed immediately by something that might have been regret. Jake Morrison had been a weak man who'd made terrible choices, but he hadn't deserved to die for them. Then again, he'd been willing to send me to prison for crimes I didn't commit, so maybe justice had been served after all. "What about Sarah? Your wife is broke, unemployed, and facing potential criminal charges as a co-conspirator. Her lawyer thinks he can keep her out of prison, but her life as she knew it is over." I nodded, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. Sarah had chosen her path, and now she was walking it alone. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor at the gym. Detective Ray Morrison arrived looking haggard and older than his years, carrying a manila envelope and wearing an expression of profound regret. "Mr. Brennan, I owe you an apology. You were doing your job, detective. You had evidence of crimes and you acted on it. Evidence that was fabricated by my own brother to frame an innocent man. Evidence I should have questioned more carefully." Ray sat down heavily on a bench, looking like a man who'd lost everything he believed in. "I've been a cop for 15 years, Tommy. I thought I could tell the difference between truth and lies, between justice and corruption. But my own brother played me like a fool. What happened to Jake wasn't your fault, wasn't it? If I'd been more careful, more skeptical, maybe he'd still be alive. Maybe none of this would have happened." I studied the detective's face, seeing genuine pain and remorse. Ray Morrison was a good cop who'd been manipulated by people he trusted, just like I'd been manipulated by people I loved. "What's in the envelope?" I asked. "Everything. All the evidence we collected, all the witness statements, all the proof of the conspiracy against you. I thought you should have it." I took the envelope but didn't open it. "What will you do now?" "I don't know. Internal Affairs is investigating my role in the case. I'll probably be suspended, maybe fired. My career is over either way." "You could fight it. Hire a lawyer, claim you were deceived by your brother and the other conspirators." Ray shook his head. "I don't want to fight it. I failed to protect an innocent man from a corrupt system. I don't deserve to wear this badge." After he left, I opened the envelope and spread its contents across Hank's desk. Police reports, witness statements, financial records, photographs. The complete story of how Trina Walsh had orchestrated my destruction, told in official documents and legal testimony. But there was something else in the envelope, something that made my blood run cold. A transcript of a recorded phone conversation between Trina and Sarah, dated just 2 days before my arrest. "Are you sure Tommy won't fight back?" Sarah's voice, worried and uncertain. "Tommy Brennan is a sheep," Trina's voice, confident and cruel. "He's spent his whole life being nice to people who don't deserve it. He'll take whatever punishment we give him and blame himself for it." "But what if he finds out the truth?" "He won't. And even if he does, what's he going to do about it? Tommy doesn't have the stomach for real revenge. He's too soft, too moral, too weak." I read the transcript 3 times, feeling something dark and cold crystallizing in my chest. Trina had been wrong about many things, but she'd been right about one. The old Tommy Brennan had been too soft for real revenge, but the old Tommy Brennan was dead. In his place was someone harder, someone who understood that mercy was weakness and forgiveness was surrender. Someone who knew that in a world full of hunters, you either learned to hunt or you became prey. That evening, I drove to the lakeside estate where Judge Harrow had been holding his monthly poker games for the past 10 years. The property was isolated, surrounded by woods, with a long driveway that provided privacy for the kind of illegal activities that had made Harrow rich and ultimately brought him down. But tonight, the estate was hosting a different kind of gathering. Sarah had called me that morning, desperate and alone, begging for one final meeting. She'd claimed she had information about Trina's other sufferers, evidence that could help put her away for life. I knew it was probably a lie, another manipulation, but I was curious to see what my soon-to-be ex-wife thought she could offer me. Besides, I had my own agenda for the evening. The estate was dark when I arrived, with only a few cars in the circular driveway. I recognized Sarah's Honda and David Walsh's BMW, along with 2 other vehicles I didn't know. It looked like Sarah had assembled the surviving members of the conspiracy for one final meeting. I parked at the end of the driveway and walked toward the house, my footsteps crunching on gravel. Storm clouds were gathering overhead, and the air smelled of rain and electricity. Sarah met me at the front door, looking desperate and frightened. "Tommy, thank God you came. We need to talk." "About what?" "About Trina, about everything she did to all of us." She led me into the main room, where I found David Walsh sitting at a poker table with 2 other people I recognized from around town. One was Margaret Chen, Mike's wife, who'd apparently been another of Trina's sufferers. The other was Robert Harrison, Judge Harrow's son, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "What is this?" I asked. "It's an intervention," Sarah said. "All of us were manipulated by Trina Walsh. All of us were sufferers of her revenge scheme." "Some more than others," I said, looking directly at David. David had the grace to look ashamed. "Tommy, I know what I did was unforgivable, but Trina was blackmailing me, threatening to destroy my family if I didn't cooperate. So you decided to destroy mine instead. I thought I could make it right later. You thought you could betray me and get away with it." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began hitting the windows. Margaret Chen spoke up for the first time. "Tommy, Trina stole money from our business, too. She's been running cons on people in this town for years." "What do you want from me?" Sarah leaned forward, her eyes bright with desperate hope. "We want to work together, pool our resources, share information, make sure Trina pays for everything she's done. Trina is already going to prison for the rest of her life. What more do you want?" "We want our lives back," Robert Harrison said quietly. "My father's reputation is destroyed, but maybe we can salvage something from the wreckage." I looked around the table at these people who'd been touched by Trina's poison, some as sufferers, some as willing accomplices. They all looked desperate, broken, ready to grasp at any hope of redemption. "There's just one problem with your plan," I said. "What's that?" Sarah asked. "You're assuming I want to help you." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain hitting the windows harder now and thunder getting closer. "Tommy," Sarah said carefully, "what do you mean?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the storm. "I mean that some of you aren't sufferers, Sarah. Some of you are criminals who got caught. But we were all manipulated. Were you manipulated when you forged my signature on those checks? Were you manipulated when you lied to the police about my whereabouts? Were you manipulated when you tried to steal everything I'd worked for? Sarah's face went white. Tommy, please. Were you manipulated, David, when you sabotaged my legal defense? When you advised me to take a plea deal for crimes I didn't commit? David Walsh looked like he was going to be sick. Tommy, I can explain. No need for explanations. I know exactly what each of you did and why you did it. I turned back to face the table, and they all saw something in my eyes that made them shrink back in their chairs. You want to know the truth? The truth is that Trina Walsh couldn't have destroyed me without help. She needed accomplices, people willing to betray their friends and neighbors for money or to save their own skins. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the room in stark white light. She needed a wife willing to steal from her husband. She needed a lawyer willing to betray his client. She needed a judge willing to pervert justice for bribes. She needed all of you. But we can make it right, Margaret Chen said desperately. We can testify against her, help put her away. Trina Walsh is already finished. The question is, what happens to the rest of you? I walked back to the table and sat down, looking at each of them in turn. Sarah, you're broke, unemployed, and facing potential criminal charges. Your lover is dead, your best friend is going to prison, and your husband wants nothing to do with you. Sarah started crying, but I continued without mercy. David, you're going to lose your law license and probably go to jail yourself. Your wife is in federal custody, your reputation is destroyed, and your children won't speak to you. David put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Margaret, your business is under federal investigation for money laundering. Even if you avoid criminal charges, you'll spend the rest of your life paying lawyers and accountants. I looked at Robert Harrison last. And you, Robert, get to watch your father die in federal prison while his legacy crumbles around you. The storm was directly overhead now, with thunder and lightning coming almost simultaneously. The lights flickered, and rain lashed the windows like bullets. What do you want from us? Sarah whispered. I want you to understand something. All of you. Actions have consequences. Choices have prices. You all chose to betray people who trusted you, and now you get to live with the results of those choices. I stood up and walked toward the door. Enjoy your meeting. I hope you find what you're looking for. Tommy, wait! Sarah called after me. Please, we can work together. We can... I turned back one final time, and the expression on my face silenced her immediately. Sarah, you wanted me gone. You got your wish. I'm not the same man you married, and I'm not the same man you betrayed. That man was weak, trusting, willing to forgive people who didn't deserve it. Lightning flashed again, and in its harsh light, they could all see what I'd become. The man standing here now understands that mercy is weakness, and forgiveness is surrender. He understands that in a world full of hunters, you either learn to hunt, or you become prey. I walked to the door and paused with my hand on the knob. You wanted a villain, Sarah. Congratulations. You created one. I walked out into the storm, leaving them sitting in the dark as the power finally failed. Behind me, I could hear Sarah calling my name, but her voice was already being swallowed by the wind and rain. As I drove away from the estate, I felt a sense of completion that surprised me with its intensity. The old Tommy Brennan would have tried to help them, would have offered forgiveness and second chances to people who'd betrayed him. But the old Tommy Brennan was dead, eliminated by the people who'd claimed to love him. In his place was someone harder, someone who understood that justice and revenge were often the same thing. They'd wanted me erased from their lives. Instead, I'd erased them from mine. The villain always gets the last word.